people often say that choosing the right domain is crucial for a business because it's really like the digital address for that store on the internet. Web 2 domains, we really think about them in terms of businesses, right? You think about Amazon.com, IBM.com, Microsoft.com. Now you're basically turning that on its head. In Web 3, a domain is really looking at an individual. It's not just for a business, but it's also a person's digital identity. At Unstoppable, we tokenize a .com domain. So we've now taken a Web 2 domain and we've also given it Web 3 superpowers. I truly believe that the first thing to do away with Web 2 and Web 3 will be domains or this digital identity because it's already happening today.
Welcome to another episode of the Untangling Web3 podcast. Today, we're very excited to be joined by Sandy Carter from Unstoppable Domains. With a career spanning 20 years in tech, Sandy is perfectly positioned to chart the course all the way from Web 1 to Web 2 and now to Web 3. As the Chief Operating Officer of Unstoppable Domains, Sandy's current role is driving the growth of one of the most interesting projects in Web 3, which seeks to put unique and verifiable Web 3 domains that users truly own in the hands of every person on the planet. Sandy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jack. It's such a great pleasure to be here.
And this is actually a special occasion because your birthday today. It's the first birthday we've had on the podcast. So we've got to start with a nice happy birthday. We won't do the whole sing song because Jack and I have terrible voices.
Man.
But Sandy, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. How are you doing today?
I am having a great day. I was woken up at 5 a.m. by my brother. You know how brothers are, singing me happy birthday. So it actually started really good and it's only continued for sure.
That's lovely. I hope that we can keep continuing that and have an upwards trend and a positive show. I think it's going to be great. So let's kick off. Like Jack said, that you've had a 20-year career. You understand how the web has transitioned. It'd be great to get your insight about your journey across Web 1, Web 2, and eventually what brought you into the wild world of Web 3.
Yeah, I mean, it's really been an interesting journey to be sure. I've worked for several different startups and a couple of Fortune 50 companies, and I've traveled throughout the internet, I guess I would say, as we've been doing that. It was really fascinating to see like the first commerce site. I was actually an intern. And Victoria's Secret put their TV ad on that linked to the internet, like for the first time, and it brought down the internet. You guys probably don't even remember that, but I was an intern and we were panicked because I worked for IBM, who was hosting the back end of Victoria's Secret as they did that. That was really the first start of understanding the impact that the internet was going to have on people's lives, like everyday people's lives, not just technologists around the world. And then, of course, you get into Web 2. And, I had the pleasure of doing cloud at Amazon Web Services, artificial intelligence. Yes, artificial intelligence existed before OpenAI. I know many people don't believe that, but I got to work on Watson when Watson played Jeopardy. One of the first really good demonstrations of the power of what AI could be in the future. And then really continue the journey, but always thinking about what was going to help our customer. How could I be more customer obsessed? I think it's why I fit in really well with the Amazon culture because that's all they do is obsess over their customers. And as I went through that whole journey, thinking about what customers want, I carved out a little niche for myself for looking at emerging tech. In particular, how would emerging tech impact enterprises, but more importantly, people and their everyday life too? And so while I was at Amazon, I was started to look at some of those Web 3 pieces and how it would really tack on to what I had already done with the cloud, with AI and beyond. So I've had I think a great career. I'm super happy with what I've accomplished and what I've done and the impact I've been able to have. One of the stories I like to tell is when I was a young girl, my dad and I would look up at the stars and I would dream about being an astronaut. That's what I wanted to be when I was young. And of course, that obviously did not happen. But when I was at Amazon, I actually got to work on the project with a partner who sent rover to Mars. So I always
Wow.
tell, especially young girls when I'm talking to them, sometimes your dreams come all the way back around. You may not reach them in the same way you envisioned, but usually if you're really focused and really dedicated, it can come back around. So I didn't get to go to the moon as an astronaut, but I got to help at Mars rover. They're using artificial intelligence.
Wow. What a career that is. That I don't know where to start with that. So many interesting threads. And you definitely seem exactly like the kind of person I can imagine working at Amazon, right? That kind of the leadership principles they have, it clearly shines through when you speak. It's interesting that you also mentioned Watson and IBM. So an interesting kind of observation that I've seen is that in 1943, IBM's president Thomas Watson, he famously made one of the worst predictions in all time in tech, basically said that there's going to be a global market for at most 5 computers. Right now, obviously, that was very, very wrong.
A bit off, yeah.
Yeah, we've all got computers in our homes, in our pockets, on our wrists now, and part of that growing up of the internet and computing infrastructure is the domain name system, right? And what we're here to talk about today is domains and how they're transitioning. But we haven't actually covered it on the show yet. So could you give a kind of explain like I'm five version of what are domains exactly from a Web 1, Web 2 sense and why are they important?
Yeah, so this is actually how I would explain it. If the internet was this huge city and there were millions of houses and businesses in the internet, each website is like one of those houses. And to find a specific house, you need its address. So domains are simply the addresses for websites on the internet. Makes it easy for us to find things without remembering long streams of numbers called IP addresses so that computers can find each other. So for example, instead of typing in 123.79, you can visit a website and you can simply type in toyshop.com.
I love that explainer. I think it's really impressive. If you can explain something to a 5-year-old, it shows that you really understand it. And I don't know much about this space either. And now I think I understand it. So thank you for that. So considering that domains are addresses, like you've just said, what are some of the challenges that we face with traditional domains, well, Web 2 environment domains right now?
Well, first, if you think about a domain, people often say that choosing the right domain is crucial for a business because it's really like the digital address for that store on the internet. And as we've been thinking about Web 2 domains, we really think about them for the most part in terms of businesses, right? You think about Amazon.com, IBM.com, Microsoft.com, and they're typically a business that you're thinking about. One of the things that I love about Web3 is that now you're basically turning that on its head. And in Web3, a domain is really looking at an individual. So it's not just for a business, but it's also a person's digital identity. And that's one of the things I really love about the Web3 space as opposed to a traditional domain. And Web2 is so important. I think it's really crucial in setting up what's the internet, what it's all about. And I think in Web3, the domain will be really important for the individual as well as the company too.
I really like how you characterize what domains were in the old world versus what they are now. There's definitely a kind of parallel between things like IoT, where we want to address individual devices and things. We're moving from it just being businesses to now being businesses and people, and then in the future, maybe even devices. And when I think of domains, typically I think of domain hoarders in Web 2, people who buy up these domains because it's big business, right? One example I'm aware of is in Tuvalu. So in Tuvalu, the top level domain for the country is .tv, right? And then they realized this was a huge opportunity when Twitch streaming happened. And now they're making something like $10 million a year from licensing out that domain. So in the Web 2 world, for me, it's associated with making a quick buck. But in Web 3, I think I'm all right in saying it's more about empowering individual users. Is that right?
That's right. So I think the big thing is when they say that all things that start that you always come back to history. So if you think about Web 1, Web 1 was actually about us getting information and it was really individual and individually focused. And if you think about Web 2, it went to platforms, right? Platforms controlling the information and owning the data and even owning our identities, right? Which we saw when Twitter rebranded to X, the person who owned the X as their identity, it was gone. So they didn't own, not only did they not own their data, they didn't own their identity either. And now we're back to Web3, but back to the future, back to where the web started, which was individual ownership of your identity and of your data. That it's really important, I would almost say essential, that you own the information about yourselves. And we were chatting earlier, I have 2 daughters, and it's really interesting to watch them as they're growing up being very protective of their data, in particular online. I remember my dad like protecting his credit card and his license, like he wouldn't take a picture of it and share it with anybody. But my daughters are protective of their data online. And I think that's what we're going to see with Web3 is that ownership of the data, ownership of your digital identity becomes very important because now it's not just about a company, not owned by an entity or a country, it's owned by us.
This is really interesting. I'd never kind of thought about this distinction before. I'd always thought of like domains as like pages that I can access on the internet. And we've done a lot on digital identities and the rise of digital identities, how important self-sovereign identity is going to be. Are you saying that you imagine a world in which like the domain aspect of like when most people think of it going to a website, going to a page is going to merge or maybe integrate with the idea of an individual having their own address that relates to all their credentials, all their social media and everything related to digital identity as well?
I do. In fact, I believe that the first place we're going to see Web 2 and Web 3 collide, like we don't call what we do today Web 2, but when we moved from Web 1 to Web 2, we called it Web 2, and then it got to be just the web. And I think that the first place that we're not going to say Web 2 and Web 3 will be with domains. And the reason I think that is the powers that you get with a Web 2 domain coupled with Web 3 really give you everything you need, not only to fulfill the needs of a business, but also a person. And in fact, at Unstoppable Domains, part of our mission is to get in the hands of every person their digital identity, which would mean getting everybody a domain. So imagine, Alec, that that digital identity, you can transact with it. So for example, you could pay with it. We can do this today, right? I can pay with my sandy.crypto or sandy.nft.
Mm.
And in fact, at Unstoppable, we do 30 million transactions a week where people use that domain to resolve to a crypto address. 30 million a week. And we're still not in like the top of the market. And so you can see that's a huge use case. But even more importantly, you'll see a domain almost act as your citizen portal. It'll have information about you, maybe a tokenized driver's license. Tokenization just means that the asset is online, on the internet, on blockchain. You might have your driver's license, your birth certificate, your membership in the Chamber of Commerce, your last concert ticket may be digitized so you can hold that as well. And that will give you as a person some phenomenal benefits. I'll just give you 2 real quick. A friend of mine was born in Venezuela. She's living here in the US now. She lost her birth certificate. She's got no family left in Venezuela and she needs her birth certificate. So she reached out to the hospital. The hospital burned down. So how does she get her birth certificate? Like, what does she do? And so we were chatting and she goes, if I had digitized it, if I had it inside of my domain or my digital identity, then I would always have it. It would always be with me. And then another example, I was down in Brazil and I had an accident and I needed to go to the emergency room. I went to the emergency room. They wanted to operate right away, but they couldn't because they didn't have my medical records. And so then I, in this horrible state, had to call to get hospitals to transfer records down. It took 72 hours to get the information down. Now, imagine if I had all that information with me in my digital identity and I could have just shared it. I could have gone into surgery immediately. These are really valuable use cases for a digital identity and using that domain to represent that for a person and a company, right? Like today, that digital identity, IBM.com, Amazon.com, that is their identity. Having the same thing for individuals, I think, is a very powerful concept.
I love the concept of digital identity applied to healthcare. It makes it so tangible for so many people. It's just like a universal problem. And we have similar problems here internally within the NHS, where we have different regions, and each region will hold the information, their own records. And when you go from one to another, it takes time to get the data across. And there's such an obvious use case of a self-sovereign model where the data is held on my device, it's mine. But you still need some way to independently or verify that data is authentic in an open way, right? Especially when we're talking cross country. I love that use case. I'm so happy you used it because it makes me like smile every time, because it's the most Web3 concept ever. Let's not talk about that all day, because I could, and I know Jack could as well. We're here to talk about unstoppable domains. You've talked a little bit about them, given some hints here and there. What is an unstoppable domain?
So, Unstoppable Domain as a company is a platform for your digital identity. And we store your digital identity as a domain. It started out with a simple use case, like most startups do, which was, since in the olden days where you used to have to type in that IP address, that 123.79, to get to a website, the same thing was happening in Web3, in particular when people wanted to pay with crypto, right? 21 letters and numbers, hard to remember. If you get one wrong, you could send $1,000 to Jack when you really meant to send it to me for my birthday. And so why not just have a sandy.nft that you could send that money to? Be much easier to remember versus 21 characters and digits. That was the first use case. As I said, we're doing about 30 million transactions a week of that resolution today, which is still our number one use case. But now it's grown, like the possibilities have really expanded. That digital identity or that domain today holds information about different places that you can vote. It holds digitized car titles. It holds other NFTs, so like pictures, but it also holds tickets. So, for example, if I wanted to know if someone attended an event, I could see that because it would be trusted and verified as it sits on the blockchain, which is a type of technology that enables the trusted verification piece.
Could I ask you a quick question there then? So is Unstoppable Domain, does it have its own blockchain? Is it built on top of blockchains? Is it like cross-chain? What's the setup there?
So it's actually, when we create an identity, it's actually created either in Ethereum or Polygon, which are two blockchains. Polygon's a layer 2, so it's built on Ethereum.
Great.
But when you go to use it, you can use it with any blockchain. So if you're going to use it to transact with a wallet with crypto, we support, I don't know, 173 wallets today across all chains, all EVM chains and all Solana base, et cetera. So for the use of it, it doesn't matter what chain, it's multi-chain. For the actual where it's stored on Polygon and Ethereum.
That makes a lot of sense, because one of my next questions was going to be, how does this setup differ from something like the Ethereum naming system, right? So that's my entry point into this world of what I would think of as unstoppable domains in concept, but not necessarily what you were doing. And that was something I wanted to learn about. When I looked into the ENS kind of system, that's really novel and interesting to me, because it's issuing domain names and creating a market for them that is truly fully on chain. I would call that a kind of pure Web3 only domain system. So is it the case that then Unstoppable Domains is integrating with that, or are you building and issuing new things that aren't just on the ENS system? How does that kind of work?
Yeah, so we actually sell .eth on our website as another extension. So, in the Web2 world, you have .com, .ai, which is also a country who's also making money because AI has exploded. DU, all of those are extensions. So we actually also own a set of extensions. And ENS owns one, which is .eth, which is also a country extension, by the way. It's Ethiopia, if you didn't know that. And so I think some of the differences are that for us, when you buy the domain, because it's your digital identity, we felt you should own it, not rent it. You don't pay like a yearly subscription. If you forget, you don't lose your identity, you own it. So just like the whole ethos of Web3 and blockchain is ownership, we took that all the way to the end and said, you own that domain. There is no what we call gas fees. So you have to pay to be on this decentralized network. You don't have to do that. And the other really cool thing is, with a unstoppable domain, you can create your profile. It's like a LinkedIn page for Web3, but everything on the page is actually trusted and verified. So I was reading some reports from LinkedIn. They said that about 30% of people who list their college on LinkedIn actually didn't go to that college
Mhm.
because there's nothing verifying it, right? Like I
Mm.
can write whatever I want. I could go out there and change my profile today to say I'm the Queen of England, but I'm not. But I can say that, right? Because there's nothing verifying it. But in the blockchain world, it's verified by another source. And so what you have in your LinkedIn profile for Web3 is actually verified data. And so that's what we're trying to do. So with your unstoppable domain, you have now the potential as that digital identity grows and more things are tokenized, meaning more things are brought online on the chain, on blockchain, then you have a place to store them. And we see huge trends. I was just at Davos in January and people were talking about tokenizing everything. I was at a session from NASA. They're tokenizing space debris and satellites, meaning the ownership of it is going to be digitized. It's going to be on chain. Clothing companies. So if I want to say this shirt is sustainable, I need to digitize every step of the shirt from the cotton that it's made from, proving that was sustainable, to the way I manufactured it, to the way I shipped it. All that's going to be digitized. It's the same for food, real estate. I was just talking to the woman who did the first real estate deal as an NFT on the blockchain, eliminated a bunch of paperwork. But where do you store that deed? Now you can store that in your digital identity. So the list goes on and on. Even there was the first large language learning model that was digitized or tokenized that now can be stored in your unstoppable digital identity. And so we just see this as a place to store everything about you. You own it. You decide who gets to see it. You get to decide how long they can see it for, how much they see. One of the best examples is if you go into a bar and you show your driver's license, all they really need to see, they don't need to see your height, your weight, your eye color. All they need to see is, are you over 21? At least that's what it is in the US. I don't know what you guys are. The cool thing about a digital identity is now you can share just what you need to share. You don't have to share everything about yourself. And I think this is really a powerful concept. It's one of the reasons I came over to Unstoppable. Again, jumping on that emerging tech trend, I just saw so much power in here, especially when you combine it with AI. There is so much power, so many superpowers for people and for companies.
I love that. And I think it gets me so excited about the concept of how much can be tokenized and how much opportunity that brings. I've heard people talking about like tokenizing pencils and the most ridiculous things. And you're like, okay, when Ethereum's charging sometimes $30 to move any transaction, I don't know if you'd be tokenizing pencils, but for the identity stuff, for the big ticket items for the satellites, it obviously makes a lot of sense. I really didn't think that this talk was going to go so much down the identity route, which I find really interesting. There's so much overlap between domains and the digital identities of the future. So one thing that we have seen on this program, because there's a few people in a few kind of different countries pushing digital identities, is maybe the lack of standardization and the lack of kind of regulatory standards in this. The only real thing I've seen is around the W3C identity standards. What do you think about this stuff? Because we're talking about interoperability so important. We touched on it a little bit there in the Ethereum network, but it's got to be huge when we're moving forward, especially when we're talking about cross-border stuff. But what do you think about it, the standards within digital identity right now?
I do feel that standards can help and guide. But, as with any emerging new tech, you don't want to do standards too fast either, right? We like to say we're just getting started in what digital identity can be. And if you look right now at what's inhibiting healthcare identity in the US, it's HIPAA. And so that's a strong, solid, really good regulation. But how do you take that to the next level where you get to share that data and that you're ensuring that the HIPAA standards today don't allow that? So I think you have to balance between standards and regulations, which are good and can help progress and make things interoperable. And then what time that you do that so that you get the innovation moving and continuing to grow as you do that. I think that's where I am today. And I watched really carefully. The US really didn't call out for crypto standards. And so you see crypto and Web3 really growing fast in Asia and the Middle East, where they've adopted it and set standards for it. It really has taken off because people know the boundaries. So I think if you can frame that correctly, then you can see some real great innovative growth at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And talking of standards as well, we have these existing standards for domains, right? I think it's the ICANN as the
Yeah.
organization that does this, that organizes numbers for computers, basically, and things like that. So you have a kind of spectrum now, as I see it. You have traditional domains, which are completely kind of ICANN standard. That's what we have powering basically everything. Then you have almost these, I think, as you described them, even Web3 compatible domains, which are also backwards compatible with this ICANN standard. So things like the .nft domain, .wallet domain. And tell me if I'm wrong. These allow you to access the Web3 capabilities whilst also being able to resolve to a traditional website. And then in the third case, you have these kind of pure Web3 only domains like your .x, .eth that let you just lock in that ownership element, handle your digital identity in the Web3 world, even if it doesn't allow you to resolve to a website like when you go into Google or something like that. Is that roughly the landscape that we have now?
Yeah, I would say that's true. So you have pure Web2 domains. And now we've actually tokenized, like an Unstoppable, we tokenize a .com domain. And what that means, we talked about tokenizing everything. So we've now taken a Web2 domain and we've also given it Web3 superpowers. So a sandy.com, I could actually transact with that. I could pay in crypto with that. I could set up a profile with that. So now .com has both the powers of Web2 as well as Web3. And this is why I said earlier, I truly believe that the first thing to do away with Web2 and Web3 will be domains or this digital identity because it's already happening today. Now, on the flip side, you have some of these things that are pure Web3. So let's take x.eth, .crypto. Now, ICANN, which we love to work with ICANN, ICANN has the next set of domains that they're going to release in 2026. They're going to start that process. So many of these pure Web3 domains, we're actually going to start planning and strategizing for that ICANN GTLD, and that could make them as well a Web2 and a Web3. So hence, when that starts in 2026, 2027, what you're going to do is you're going to have a meshing of this to where there'll be a domain. I don't think you'll really be saying Web2, Web3. It'll be a domain because all will be tokenized and all, I believe, will live on blockchain.
Absolutely. I think that's, bringing these things together that are emerging organically based on actual user demand in the AWS, Amazon world. That's what the customers want at the end of the day. They want to have all these things at their fingertips. So I think that's exactly the right way to tackle it. I've got so many questions and we probably haven't got time to go into all the technical details. Maybe we'll do it in another episode in the future. But there's two things, and I'll cheat by asking two quick questions here. Firstly, can you just walk us through what the kind of life cycle of one of the domains are that you issue or sell through Unstoppable Domains? So, like, how does it get created and chosen, and then how does it end up in a user's wallet, or how do they own it? And then, secondly, you mentioned this digital identity piece about storing everything about you, being able to add all these different attestations. What are the privacy implications there? Is that stuff being stored on chain, or is that stuff being stored somewhere else and kind of linked to it?
Great question. So if you want to get a digital identity, it's real simple, really easy. You go up to unstoppabledomains.com and you pick out what you want your identity to be. It could be maybe you want Sandy for casual things. Maybe I want Sandy Carter for my professional domain because I might have a couple of identities, right? Like I'm a mom, I'm an executive, I'm a wife. So maybe I want, just like I have different identities, maybe I want different types of identities as well. So you can pick that out. You can do the same for your company. Like we have a lot of companies who get their Web3 identity. So you just select it, you purchase it, and then you store it in a wallet. Now, there are lots of different wallets out there. We just created a wallet that's like a light wallet for Web2 users. And we did that because we've been partnering with a lot of Web2 companies. So we partnered with Austin, which is a city. So they're working with citizens, and citizens have all different levels of knowledge. And so a lot of citizens were struggling with, I got to go get this crypto wallet thing. I don't even know what to do. Is someone going to take my money? What's going to happen? And so we created a really light wallet that you could store your domains in and still get value and use out of it, but without having to worry about understanding everything about Web3 and everything about crypto. And then once you get your wallet, you simply purchase it and then you set up your profile. And setting up your profile is super easy. It's just like setting it up on LinkedIn or setting it up on Facebook. And you get to choose, because you own your data, what do you want to show? Like, do you want to show that you went to a Gary Vee concert, or do you want to show that you were at the NFL? You can choose what you decide you want to show because you own your data. And you can set that up. You can set up your gamer tag. So if you're a gamer, I'm a big gamer. You can actually use your digital identity when you go play a game with Atari or Snook or whoever you're playing with. You can use that same thing as your gamer tag too. So super easy to set up. Now, your second question, Jack, was about privacy and confidentiality. And I think this is a really big one for widespread adoption that we don't talk about a lot. And in fact, when you talk about privacy, a lot of times there's a lot of negativity with privacy. The way I like to see it is that you, as the owner of your data, get to decide what you choose to show. And so, for example, if you're using Sandy.nft to log into something, the app in Web3, in a Web3 world, asks you, says, I'm going to use your email. I'm going to use your birthday. I'm going to use this. And you can go in and say, not my birthday, not my email, but you can have my gamer tag or whatever. And so I think it's actually easier to manage it when you have some of these confidentiality things. We've recently partnered with a blockchain called Secret. And Secret is actually what they call a confidential chain. And it really addresses one of the things that have blocked widespread adoption, which is you don't get to see everything about everybody. It blocks that. Just like we do at Unstoppable, it blocks it also from showing on chain. So, if you don't want everybody to know that you get a pizza every Friday night at 7 p.m., then you can block that. So people don't know that you eat pizza every Friday night at 7 p.m. And I think that's going to be really important for widespread adoption, is that everything's not visible at all times.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's like one of the biggest misconceptions that we see in the space. And when people think blockchain, they're like, okay, if I buy a Bitcoin and send a Bitcoin, am I all of a sudden going to have my entire history put on the Bitcoin for everyone to see? And you're like, nope, that's not how it works necessarily. And I'm glad you cleared that up. A question I had about this, you're talking about identity space, and the idea is I'm setting up my domain and I can choose what information I put in there. Say if one is my gamer tag, right? Does that mean you also support, say, KYC? Because I couldn't put my gamer tag in there, then all of a sudden buy alcohol, right? So do you also support the KYC level to say this is a verified profile and all that stuff as well?
We do. We actually, on your profile, we have a reputation score to show how safe it is to do business with you. And we
Love
have
that.
what we call a humanity check, which is basically KYC. Now, Alec, I will tell you that pure Web3 folks will not do a KYC because they
Yeah.
don't want to be doxxed. They don't want people to know who they are.
It's like
However,
no
as
intermediaries ever, right? We want to remove
that's
all intermediaries. Like, oh, come on.
That's right. But because we have so many more Web2 folks coming in right now, we do offer that as an option. So it's a choice. You get to decide if you want to be KYC. Now, that might mean that when you go to use alec.nft to sign into, let's say, a DeFi application, a finance application, that if you won't identify who you are, they may say, no thanks, you can't come into this application. So that's the choice that you have. But at least now there is a choice. You can KYC and have your profile certified, which also helps you with AI. I think there's a huge use case with AI and what we're doing with digital identity, because now anything online, you can verify it with your identity. So think about a quote in an article. I can say, pink check mark, I said that quote, right? And a news article could look at that. Or think about, remember the Pope when he was shown in a Ballman jacket, his puffer jacket? And then he came out and said, no, that wasn't me. That was a deep fake. I could take a picture of myself in a puffer jacket and post it and do a check mark with my name, my identity, and say, yes, this is actually my picture. And so I think because of that linkage together, where you have that ability to verify in a trusted way that this is from someone, you can really link those two together.
I love that. And you're so right. You need both, right? For the Web3 natives, yeah, all peer to peer. It's all about reviews. I've dealt with this person and I can independent review that, all that stuff. And they're so scared of intermediaries in a lot of cases, especially with the KYC. But for the Web2, which is most people in the world, right? The people who really need to get into this space, they need KYC. And we do need intermediaries. We're never going to remove all of them. That's like ridiculous. I'm so glad that you've got the setup and configurability to support both. That's the right way to do it. You talked there, and I love it. Like, I love talking about AI, IoT, especially when we're talking about digital identity applied to that space. You talked a lot about human identity and verifying humans versus AI. Have you ever thought about how this stuff applies to, IoT identity or AI identity and trying to verify content related to that? Come on, you're emerging tech. You've been in this stuff for ages. You've got the AI background. Can you give us a little bit of insight as to what you think the future of those spaces look like with regards to this?
Yes. In fact, we just had a roundtable about this at a conference I was at. And imagine today, if you think about a car is mostly software today.
Mm.
And a car itself could have its own digital identity. And the reason being that identity, imagine a car's profile. You could verify, has it had its oil changed? Has it been in a wreck? All that could be inside of a digital identity. So I really believe that this will go, it was started at companies, individuals, and now I do think there'll be devices and elements that will also have their identity as well.
I think that's a really exciting prospect. Just thinking about something like the secondhand car market in the UK could really benefit from having these credentials, these identities associated with cars, so you know exactly its history, what kind of things it's gone through, basically, and to help value that properly, right? Because a lot of people at the end of the day, they lose out. But there's so many other applications. When you're now talking about things like driverless cars, it just kind of blows my mind.
Do you guys have a name for your car?
I've got
You
a camper van and it's called Gaz. So yes.
So my car is Boo. And I was just looking because we just had this roundtable about could cars have their own digital identity and what's the power and the value of that. And they did a survey and they found out that 78% of Americans name their car. Isn't that fascinating? So they're
It's
already
quite
getting
cute.
identity. Now they just needed a digital identity. Maybe it's not true where you guys are from, but anyway, I thought that was fascinating. That many people have a name for their car.
I think it's a good point, right? I actually know many people. I'm just one of these weird ones who doesn't bother. But yeah, I think maybe in the future it'll be our AI agents, right? Our copies of ourselves that will be naming that help us out every day, our own individual LLMs and things like that that everyone's talking about. You mentioned a lot of the benefits of unstoppable domains and these kind of Web3 based domains that you're talking about. One of the really interesting things that I saw when I was going through documentation was this idea of login as well with these credentials. So being able to take this single, not just take your credentials and prove things, but use it to actually access services in a kind of maybe more secure and robust way than what we do with Google OAuth and things like that now. So is that something you guys are working on actively, is bringing that capability out? Because it looks really cool. From what I could tell, it's kind of like when you go and log into a website or something, then you actually maybe are tying your cryptographic keys scored on the blockchain to this and to sign things. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So you can use, like, let's do jack.nft. I could take jack.nft and today log into about 1,000 applications. It could be a finance application. It could be a game, could score like things that could store things like your scores for games. It could be for just a healthcare application. All of that you could log in with one identity. And the cool thing about that is the identity then is not tied to a platform. For example, I have friends who have businesses on Facebook. And one friend recently had their Facebook page shut down, which shut down their business for a month, and they had no idea why.
Oh.
Here, you own it. And so your ability to take that idea across applications and to own the data from that means that if someone shuts you down in one place, you can come up in another place. So you've got that autonomy to do that and to leverage it. I think the number one thing right now for people looking for a branded identity, which we just did a .Austin for citizens of Austin. We did a .pudgy. I don't know if your audience is familiar with the pudgy penguins. No, yes, you got one said yes, one said no. Pudgy penguins is that started out as an NFT collection, which is basically digital pictures, but it's now moved to plushies, which are like stuffed animals
Yeah.
that any kid can buy. Let me see if I can show you this. I just got this mug from Pudgy Penguins. It has a pudgy penguin on it. So they're moving into all kinds of things. And so for a group like that, they can do a .pudgy, and then they can also chat in an encrypted fashion with all the different members of their community. For example, Luca, who's the CEO of Pudgy, he can now communicate with his influencers, give them maybe OG information or alpha. He can communicate with his storytellers or his number one gamers, because there's a Pudgy game that's out there too. So the really cool thing is the digital identity now not only gets you access to apps through login, Jack, like you brought up, but it also gets you access into communities or tribes. And that's really important right now, as they say that the world is in its loneliest state ever. And people are looking for connections. And so now through a domain, through a digital identity, not only can you log in and transact, but you can also have tribes of people who have similarities globally, and you can communicate to them and talk to them in one group in an encrypted fashion.
That's such a powerful idea, and one I completely subscribe to. Right, this idea of community access based on digital credentials, and also, like you said, about bringing your reputation with you and having this reputation score almost. That concept in my mind has been proven out by the likes of Reddit implementing these crypto
Yep.
tools as well. I think it's such a foundational part of the internet and trust. There's always this spectrum of trust, and reputation is a big part of that too. I'm curious. We've talked so much about the domains aspect, right? And this specific use case, although there are so many things that spring off it from digital identity. But taking all that aside and everything you're doing in your day to day working on Unstoppable Domains, is there any use case or project in Web3 that you think is really cool, you're really excited about for the future? Like maybe it's the one that motivated you to come to the industry in the first place. Maybe it's something more recent. I'd be curious to know what is that's exciting you right now.
There is a project, it's in stealth mode right now, but I really love it because it brings together healthcare. And I think that's really important, Web3 and AI. And it's really about helping people with their mental health. A lot of people will go to a counselor or will go seek help. And more people nowadays are doing that. But then once you get out of your treatment or whatever insurance pays for, there's a huge decline because there's nothing that continues it on. And so I know a couple startups who are working with applications that can help you continue with that mental health regiment. You do it so it's stored on chain. It is protected and private, but that also means that you can then release it to other doctors, other medical professionals as you care to. I was educated, I was just in New York with 100 healthcare startups who are using AI and blockchain. And one of the things that they told me is that the reason we have such a high misdiagnosis today is that all the healthcare records are kept in silos. And so if you go to your general practitioner, they get one set of data. But maybe the fact that you also have that allergy or that you had that tooth issue or that you had, maybe that really gives you a full view into your health that could have an impact on you overall. And we don't do that today. At least we don't do that in the US. Everything's so siloed. And so I think I'm really excited about this because it will impact people's health, not just their physical health, but could also impact their mental health. Using AI to identify problems, being able to store it on blockchain with Web3, and then being able to reach everybody. That's one project that I'm really excited about because it has potential for companies to make profit, but it also has strong purpose as well.
I love that. I think there's so many kind of use cases and practical examples you can think of in that space. Like you say, one of the biggest indicators, I think, of mental health or suffering with mental health tends to be how much social media you use in a day. And there's no way like a GP or a doctor is going to ask, how's your social media access today? Have you been using it so much? But like you say, we need this kind of universal data input system that takes account of everything you do day to day. But when you're talking about that kind of vast amount of data, it's not really possible for a human to compute computer, you do need something like AI. I think most people, when they think of AI today, they think of all the kind of the generative stuff, the fun, cool stuff. But I imagine there's going to be a trend to AI that's closer to the tech and just doing more of the analytics stuff, as we've seen over the last 20 years. But I love that use case. I think it's so powerful. Sandy, this has been such an epic show. I've learned so much. So thank you. We're in our last little part here. So we have 2 questions that we like to ask all our guests. The
Okay.
first one, if you're ready,
Uh-huh.
is in one sentence, what is Web3 to you?
Okay, let's see. So Web3 is the evolution, not revolution, evolution of the internet into a user-controlled platform. So user-owned identity, user-owned data, where data and assets are managed by the individual, not by a centralized entity.
Wow, that's good. Long sentence, maybe with some commas in there, but
Oh,
that is good. I
sorry.
like that very much. No, we can put semicolons in there. I love
Okay,
that.
good.
That's
Okay.
definitely one of the most inclusive. It's covered a lot of things that I love it. The second one, it's your birthday. You're going out for food later, right? If you could sit down with anyone from history or even fictional, if you wanted to, and discuss Web3, who would it be and why?
Mm. Can I do 2 since it's my
You
birthday?
can do 2. It's your birthday, so you can choose as many as you
Okay.
want, but let's say 2.
Okay. Okay. Because the first one is a real person. It's Tim Berners-Lee who invented the worldwide internet.
Nice.
And I think that his visionary ideas on how the internet could democratize information really align with what Web3's potential is to empower individuals to reshape that data and the use of the data. I would love to sit down and chat with him about it. Like, did he envision this at all when he started the web? That would be my first one.
I love
But
that one.
this,
That's Jack's as well. Jack always talks about Tim Berners-Lee. He loves it.
yeah, okay, that's great. So good. The second one, I have 2 daughters, and we went through Alice and Alice in Wonderland, how she says, I have to run twice as fast just to keep up. And I would love to talk to Alice about Web3. I was thinking about this last night when I was reading a chapter because her journey was filled with all these curious discoveries and transformations, right? If you read the book, everything's transforming. And I think it really mirrors the boundless possibilities and the real transformation that could occur with Web3, because Web3 opens the door to a new realm that we really haven't explored before, where we as users own our data. And I think that Alice is very open-minded and she's very willing to explore the unknown. So I think she would bring a very refreshing perspective to Web3.
Yeah, 2 really great answers,
Have
as
you
Alex
have
said.
you ever
I
had
think
Alice in Wonderland brought here before?
no, I imagine Tim Berners-Lee and Alice in Wonderland
And
next to
Alice
each
in
other.
Wonderland, right? Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Yeah, I would absolutely pay to be at that dinner table. That's a really, I think Alice in Wonderland's actually really interesting as an idea because it's much like Web3, going down the rabbit hole, discovering this new world that seems wacky
Yeah.
at first, but actually there's a big moral lesson to be learned there. It's just got me wondering who is the mad hatter of the Web3 crypto industry. I'll leave that with the audience. I won't put any names on it, but yeah, it's one to think about. Listen, Sally, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for taking time out of your birthday to join us. So we'll let you go now. But thanks for joining us again. And all that remains then is to say thank you so much for listening. And you can join us next time to untangle a little more Web3.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Untangling Web3.
Don't forget to send us your thoughts, questions, and comments on social media. And be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast provider to catch the next episode. See you next time to untangle a little bit more of Web3.
The views we express here are our own and do not reflect the views of our employers.